Salaries are a complex and divisive issue in the workplace. It raises all kinds of questions like how should the salary for each individual employee be set? How can workers bargain for more if they think they're worth it? How do we reduce systemic underpayment based on gender, race, or other factors? And how do we best balance the seemingly opposite interests of the company that wants to minimize expenses and the employees who want to maximize their paychecks? In this video, I want to present a simple idea that the best way, possibly the only sustainable way to handle salaries well at work is to make them open and transparent inside the workplace. Now, it probably won't surprise you to hear that this is pretty controversial. Most bosses have a nearly unshakable belief that people's salaries must be kept secret at all costs, and that mayhem would ensue in the workplace if people learned the wages of their coworkers, their managers, or even the CEO. But in this video, I want to argue that making salaries completely open and transparent inside a workplace is a great idea, not just for workers, but also for the company itself. And I'm going to do this my usual way.
In the face of overwhelming odds, I'm left with only one option. I'm gonna have to science the shit out of this.
It turns out there are tons of studies and plenty of practical cases that prove my point. I am also going to have to do some debunking. I've been advocating for salary transparency for years. And trust me when I say that some people hate the very idea with a burning passion. So I will also take some time to refute the most common arguments against salary transparency. Some of them have merit, but a lot of them are either dumb or made in bad faith, or often both. Finally, I'll share some tips on how exactly companies can make salaries open and what you can do as an employee if your workplace refuses to do it. But let's start with why keeping salaries top secret is a terrible idea to begin with. There are three major reasons why secret salaries are silly. The first reason is this: bosses may think they're secret, they're not. I myself have worked at two different companies where salaries were supposedly secret, and they absolutely weren't. Most people knew what many of their coworkers were getting because, guess what? People talk to each other. It can get even worse. I was consulting for a company when one day a person from their IT department stumbled upon the Excel spreadsheet that HR kept all the salaries in. In just minutes, the entire IT department knew what everyone was getting, and about half an hour later, that document had been circulated to every employee in the company, thanks to what may just have been the world's fastest operating email chain ever. They say information wants to be free, and this kind of thing happens more often than you'd think. But even when that kind of thing doesn't happen, coworkers very often share salary information with each other, even though some companies try so hard to prevent it. According to one study, about half of all US workers report that the discussion of wage and salary information is discouraged or prohibited and could lead to punishment. Here's the thing though, that is actually illegal. Most countries, including the US, have laws that directly say that employees cannot be kept from sharing salary information and cannot be punished in any way for doing so. Let me say that again. In most countries, workplaces are not allowed to keep you from sharing salary information or punish you for doing it. If you want to talk about your pay with anyone else at work or outside of it, there is nothing they can do to stop you. Now, on the other hand, I know that talking about wages is a pretty big taboo for a lot of people. If I had a more conspiratorial mindset, I might even suspect that this taboo has been consciously furthered in order to keep people underpaid. But the good thing is that this taboo seems to be going away among younger generations. Another US survey found that 40% of workers under 40 have shared their salary information with a coworker or other professional contact. So yeah, secret salaries never really are secret, that is. There's another drawback to making salaries secret. It creates a ton of frustration and dissatisfaction for employees. Here's the thing: studies show very clearly that how people feel about their salary is never determined by the actual amount. It's always determined in comparison to what others are making. People compare their pay to coworkers in similar jobs or to the market average for someone with their skills, and use that to determine if they're satisfied with their compensation. And here's the problem. If you find out that somebody's paid more than you for no good reason, but salaries are treated as a state secret, then you can't complain to your manager about it because you can't even admit that you know about it. This means the company has now created a situation where people can see any unfairness but can't do anything about it or even talk about it openly. That is basically designing a system for maximum frustration. If Johnson is making $1,000 more a month than you are, then presumably there's a good reason for it, one that you as an employee are capable of understanding. If you could ask about any difference in pay and get a good answer, that would absolutely take away a massive source of frustration. And I just want to say this. Even if a company could somehow keep employees completely in the dark about what others make, that probably wouldn't work either. Because studies also show that when people don't have any specific information about what other people make, they tend to overestimate the salaries of others. So if I don't know what that incompetent new hire is making, I'm probably just going to assume that they have a higher salary than they actually do, which would just add to my sense of unfairness and frustration. One of my favorite business books of all time is The 7-Day Weekend by Ricardo Semler, about his time as CEO of Semco, a company in Sao Paulo, Brazil. He actually made the salaries of all 3,000 employees public inside the company. Here's his reason why. Salaries are a sensitive subject, but open communication is important enough that it should be tested, even if there is a price to pay. If discussion of salaries is taboo, what else is off limits? The only source of power in an organization is information, and withholding, filtering, or retaining information only serves those who want to accumulate power through hoarding. Seriously, read that book. It's amazing. And I absolutely agree with Ricardo here. Knowledge is power. The company knows the salary of all of its employees, but each of them is only supposed to know their own salary. This creates an information asymmetry that is just begging to be exploited. And that's my final reason why salary secrecy is bad. It lets companies keep paying people unfairly. Maybe that new employee is paid more than you, not because they do a better job, but because they suck up to the boss, they play golf with a VP, or is a family member of the CEO. That just doesn't seem fair, does it? I mean, surely we can all agree that it makes much more sense to determine a person's salary based on that person's value to the company. If salaries were open, it would be easier to address and fix that kind of unfairness. Keeping salaries secret only benefits one group of people, those who are currently unfairly overpaid and can cling on to that precisely because salaries are secret. So what I'm proposing in this video is that companies should make all salaries open and transparent inside the organization. Let everyone know what everyone else is making.
What can I do for you, Rod? You just tell me, what can I do for you?
Are you ready, Jerry?
I'm ready.
Just want to make sure you're ready, brother. Here it is. Show me the money.
That may seem like a wild idea, but according to the research, it is actually an advantage for both the workplace and for its employees. I know this firsthand. When I co-founded a tech company here in Copenhagen back in 1997, we decided right from the beginning to make salaries open inside the company. We just had a page on our intranet where everybody could see what everybody else got. And yeah, that did cause some discussions along the lines of, hey, why am I getting less than that guy? My work is at least as good as theirs. We took those discussions seriously, and we either clarified the difference in salary, like, he gets more because his clients are consistently more satisfied than yours, or we adjusted the salaries to match. So what benefits did we see, and what benefits do companies in general get from making salaries open? A Harvard Business Review article reported that when salaries are transparent, employees are more satisfied, they experience more fairness and trust, and they do a better job. This increased job satisfaction means that it is easier to retain employees when salaries are transparent, because they're more likely to feel they're getting a fair salary. And I just want to make this point that if somebody's thinking that overpaying the more valuable employees would make them happier and more likely to stay with the company, they would be wrong. One study from Berkeley found that below median earners report a significant increase in the likelihood of looking for a new job, while above median earners are unaffected. This is actually a really important point. When salaries are unfair, those who are underpaid are understandably unhappy and more likely to quit. But, and this is crucial, those who are overpaid are not happy or more likely to stay with the organization. Another advantage for the workplace is that when salaries are transparent, there is pressure on the people with high salaries to earn their keep and create more value for the organization, and everybody will have to pull their weight. Also, we can more easily take things like nepotism, connections, and office politics out of compensation and instead reward those who do great work. That has to be great for the company, which clearly has a vested interest in not overpaying people who haven't earned it and in making sure that those who have earned it are paid fairly so they don't get angry and leave to work for the competition. Making salaries transparent also has some massive advantages for employees. Most importantly, transparency makes salaries more fair because the system gets a chance to adjust itself. I hate unfairness with a burning passion, and I'm not alone. Studies show that our brains are hardwired to hate unfair treatment of ourselves and others. And crucially, this is not just about adjusting wages of individual employees. It's not just about you being able to bargain for a higher salary, but it's also about creating fairness for larger groups. We know for a fact that some groups of employees are systematically underpaid in the workplace. For instance, women and minorities. This gets even worse when we look at this through intersectionality and look at, say, minority women. As long as salaries are secret, this discrimination can continue forever. Let's look specifically at the gender wage gap. A Harvard Business Review article showed that one of the most persistent features of labor markets around the world is that women earn less than men. Now, some people claim that this gender gap exists because women are just too nice or too agreeable to demand higher salaries, but those people are wrong. A study from Australia found that that's just not true. Women ask for raises just as often as men. They just don't get them as often, or they get smaller raises. And a huge part of the reason why companies can keep paying women workers less than men for the same work is precisely that salaries are secret. A study from Canada looked at the hypothesis that the gender gap in earnings persists, in part because it is hidden, and found that just making salaries transparent helped reduce the gender pay gap among college professors. Right here in Denmark, we introduced a law in 2006 that requires companies with more than 35 employees to publish data about their gender wage gap. And the results were clear. The gender pay gap shrank in companies that were subject to the law, while it stayed the same in companies that weren't. Along the same lines, the EU just passed a similar law for all companies with over 100 employees that must now share salary data by gender and adequately explain any gender pay gap bigger than 5%. And companies that don't comply will be fined. That is a good first step. The economist Zoe Cullen found that salary transparency doesn't raise the wages of the highest paid employees, but they do rise for those who are paid less. Simply put, pay transparency helps close the pay gap that is otherwise growing all over the world. And here's another interesting finding from her. It also makes people aware of just how big the pay gap is, and it's actually worse than most people think. In one of Cullen's studies, employees tried to guess the salaries of their higher ups and were also asked how confident they were about those guesses. The result? People reported high confidence in their guesses, but still consistently underestimated the salaries of managers by a lot. Here's what Cullen concluded from that. The big shock in a newly pay transparent world wouldn't be what our coworkers earning. It would be how much we underestimate what our boss and boss's bosses were making. And why shouldn't these facts be better understood? That's a super interesting point because when we talk about salary transparency, there's often a lot of focus on coworkers comparing their salaries, but this effect is often overlooked. It would reveal just how overpaid some executives are and help bring that pay gap down. The study also found that workers who learned more about salary variation in their workplace became more dissatisfied with economic inequality in society in general. Excellent. So it's pretty clear that salary secrecy is bad. It's the exact thing that allows massive inequities to persist in our workplaces and in society in general, according to the research. So, why do companies do it anyway? Well, as I keep pointing out in these videos, companies are notoriously bad at listening to any research they disagree with and will blindly keep following business orthodoxy and do what they've always done and what everyone else is doing. When I first started arguing for open salaries, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. On most other topics I cover, 9 out of 10 commenters agree with me, but on this topic, 9 out of 10 disagree and disagree strongly. I'm not sure what it is about sharing salary information that seems so dangerous or wrong to people. And interestingly, the comments I get from people in companies who have tried opening salaries are overwhelmingly in favor of the idea. Many have seen great benefits from it. And I think that more than anything just strengthens my belief that it is a good idea and that much of the resistance is from knee jerk reactionaries or from people with a strong interest in maintaining the status quo. So I want to share a little bit of my experience here. I have seen all of the arguments for and against salary transparency. So if you want to work towards it, these are the 10 most common counterpoints you're most likely to face and my rebuttals. Number one, salary is a personal matter. What I make is none of your business. And I guess that is kind of true. I mean, in today's society, talking salary is a pretty big taboo. But why is that? Does it need to be? What is so terribly personal about your salary anyway? It's no secret where a person lives or in what kind of housing. People don't try to hide what kind of car they drive, where they vacation, or what they do in their spare time. And interestingly, all of these factors would definitely let others make some very educated guesses about your salary. So, why exactly should salary be such a massive taboo? There are definitely people who hate the idea of sharing their salaries. And I have a sneaking suspicion that they are exactly the people who believe they're benefiting from the secrecy. They think they're at the top of the ranks and are fine with others being underpaid as long as they're getting theirs. And by some bizarre coincidence, the vast majority of people in this group are white men. That is so weird. Maybe, just maybe, these people have been indoctrinating the rest of us to treat money as taboo, to make us less likely to demand fair compensation for our work. Let me be clear. There is nothing inherently secret or private or personal about salary information compared to so many other things that people gladly and freely reveal about themselves. So I say we break that taboo once and for all. Objection number two, it can't be done. It's impossible. There's no way that'll work. And that's just nonsense. I mean, the short counterpoint to this is that many, many companies have done it. And in most of them, it's worked really, really well. Some companies go even further. The social media management platform Buffer actually puts the salaries of every single employee online for everyone to see, and somehow the company has not imploded yet. Objection number three, people won't demand a reasonable salary because employees overestimate their own value or just ask for as much as they can get. And I got to say that experiences from companies that have tried open salaries, including my own, just don't support this. People can be very reasonable about it and are perfectly capable of understanding that some people get paid more than others, as long as you can give them a good explanation for why, and as long as salaries are generally fair in the organization. Objection number four, chaos would ensue. People can't handle the truth.
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
Well, here's the thing. In Sweden, anyone can look up anyone else's salary online, and somehow that country has not yet collapsed into anarchy. And what it has done is that it has led to a lower salary gap between genders. Okay, there can absolutely be a little bit of turmoil and discussion when salaries are first made transparent inside a workplace. But experience shows that over time, this stabilizes as employees see unfairness decrease. Objection number five, if you make salaries transparent, people will start complaining. No, no. People are already complaining because in many cases they already know who's making what, or they've made some guesses. Making salaries open doesn't lead to complaining. It just means that managers will discover that people are complaining. And that's a good thing because it brings the complaints out into the open where they can be dealt with. Objection number 6, it's impossible to set fair wages. It's just too difficult to define how salaries are determined. Well, first of all, that seems like a very defeatist attitude. Then how are we going to set salaries? Randomly? Lottery? Random numbers? And also, if salaries are so hard to set, that will be true whether salaries are open or secret. And making them open will make it easier to set fair salaries because you know what other similar employees are getting. Having to justify salary differences would actually force an organization to deliberately decide how salaries are determined, what factors matter and what factors don't. Also, should it really be that difficult to explain why person A makes more money than person B? Shouldn't a good leader be able to easily and succinctly justify their salary decisions? I think so. Objection number 7, the company just wants to pay as little as possible. And again, that is factually true in many cases, but it's also dumb. A company should never try to pay its employees as little as possible. It should try to pay them as fairly as possible. You might think a company should try to reduce expenses by stiffing employees whenever they can, but companies who do that must be prepared to steadily lose all of their good employees to competitors who are willing to actually pay them what they're worth. Instead, a company should attempt to pay each employee a fair salary, one that matches the employee's skills, the market average, and other employees inside the company. In other words, the company itself has a vested interest in keeping salaries fair. And when salaries are secret, that becomes much, much harder. Objection number 8, your salary is not connected to your coworkers. And again, that's conceptually true, but as we've seen, your perception of salary fairness is totally connected to your coworkers' salaries. Objection number 9, what do you do if there's a sudden drought of qualified employees in the job market and you need to hire employees at significantly higher wages than existing similar employees? And I know what companies typically do in that situation when salaries are secret. They pay the new hires more and then cross their fingers and pray that the existing employees don't find out. That is extremely likely to backfire. If, and that's not really an if, that is more of a when, the old employees learn that their new colleagues are paid way more for the same work, they will become frustrated, angry, demotivated, and more likely to quit. So, what should a company do in that situation? That's a complete no-brainer. The company should, of course, raise the salaries of the existing employees to match the new ones because they're now equally valuable. That is only fair. And also, if a lack of skilled employees is driving up salaries, then the current employees could just as easily go find higher paying jobs elsewhere. And the company definitely doesn't want that if new employees are hard to find. And finally, the last objection, and also the dumbest objection, number 10, the world isn't fair. And again, as a statement of fact, I guess that is kind of true-ish, maybe. Our modern capitalist society is demonstrably unfair in about a million ways. But here's the thing. People who say that the world isn't fair, they never mean it as a statement of fact, do they? No. They want you to take it as a declaration of defeatism. The implied corollary to the world isn't fair is, and it's pointless to try and make it more fair. So you may as well give up and accept things as they are. And here's the thing. It is true, it is absolutely true that salaries in a company will never be 100% fair across the board. But we should still work to make them as fair as possible. Now, I obviously don't want to just leave you with all of the reasons why secret salaries are dumb and salary transparency is awesome. My goal with this video, and really with all of my videos, is to try to convince you to do something about it. So let me give you some tips on what you could do personally and what companies should do to promote salary transparency. My challenge to companies is this: make salaries transparent inside the organization. Put them on the internet. I dare you. It has clear benefits for both your employees and for the organization. However, don't just spring this on your people out of the blue, okay? Doing it right takes a little bit of preparation. Here are the 5 steps I would suggest. Step 1: first, define how salaries are determined. Employees need to know what factors influence salaries. Are they based on customer satisfaction, hours worked, quality, sales figures, seniority, skills, education, or what? What matters when salaries are set and what doesn't matter? If the company has not clearly stated this, then comparisons are meaningless. And of course, it is management's responsibility to determine and publicize the factors that determine employees' salaries. As an example, in my tech company, we decided that the most important factors would be customer satisfaction and commitment to the company, and that things like formal education and seniority wouldn't factor in at all. And of course, we put all of these things in a document on the internet for everyone to see. Then, step 2: identify and address any major salary unfairness before you introduce transparency. For example, Molly Moon's Ice Cream in Seattle made salaries transparent for their 150 employees. But first, they did an audit of everybody's pay to identify any inequities up front.
I would not have felt like this would have gone anywhere near as smoothly if we had published this before we made our pay structure more equitable and something that we felt like we could stand behind. I feel like anybody could come to me and ask me a question about their salary and I could answer in good conscience and give them an answer I feel like I could justify.
If there are major inequities in pay when salaries go public, that could lead to a lot of dissatisfaction. Fix that first. Step 3: create a clear process for how to address salary changes. If an employee believes their salary is unfair, who should they go to? How will the company address this? What's the time frame? What are the specific steps? Because that's the real point here. It's not about the salary information in itself. It's about how the company actively addresses any issues or questions that come out of it. Step 4: before you make salaries transparent inside the company, communicate all of the above to employees. Tell them clearly why you're doing it, when you're doing it, how it's happening, and how they and the company can act on any perceived unfairness. And now you're ready for step 5: make salaries transparent.
She then created an internal document listing all employees' salaries, including names.
We really felt like there wasn't a good way to be pay transparent and give people the information that they needed if they weren't able to see names attached to the wages. If you don't know who that other scooper is who's making 25 cents an hour more than you, how are you able to evaluate your own performance in comparison to theirs?
And since this is the first time that the data is officially available to employees, you should be prepared for a lot of questions initially, and you should be ready to handle those questions quickly. And yes, absolutely, making that data public may create some tension and doubts at first, but that will quickly settle down to a more manageable number. So that's what companies can do. What can you do as an employee if you work in a company that has problems with unfair salaries but refuses to introduce any kind of transparency? I have 4 ideas for how you can take matters into your own hands. First of all, get yourself over the taboo. Share your salary with your coworkers so you have that information to act on. My favorite example is from the 1930s and from the famous writer Dorothy Parker. She found out that some of the other writers at Vanity Fair magazine were paid way more than her and demanded a raise. Not only was she denied, but the magazine then sent out a memo to all of its employees saying that we have a long established rule that the salary question is a confidential matter between the employer and the individual. The memo also said that talking about salary would only create invidious comparison and dissatisfaction, and that anyone who broke the rule would be instantly discharged. Here's what they did. That afternoon, Dorothy Parker and two of her colleagues did their jobs in the office as usual, but they all wore signs around their neck with their weekly salaries written on them. That is pretty badass. So yes, share your salaries with each other at work. And I just want to be clear, that is not without risk. While companies are not allowed to legally punish you for it, they might do it anyway. For instance, Dorothy Parker and her two colleagues were let go from Vanity Fair a few months later. But there are two ways you can think about this risk. You could let that risk stop you from doing anything about it. That's what they're counting on. Or you could do it anyway. And then if the company does retaliate against you in any way, that might be a great opportunity to team up with a good employment lawyer and sue the pants off them. Or alternatively, it might be a great chance to get out of that workplace and go work for a company that doesn't deliberately break the law in order to preserve salary unfairness. In addition to talking to your coworkers, you can also scan the general market to figure out what a fair salary is for your job function in your area. This can vary wildly over time, so stay up to date. There are websites that can help you find that information. And then once you have reduced the information asymmetry and armed yourself with some data, it's time to use it actively and negotiate a more fair salary for yourself and for others. If you don't ask for what you think you're worth, you're probably not gonna get it. But also, don't overfixate on your paycheck, okay? Salaries will never be perfectly fair across an organization. So I would say that it makes more sense to have a job you like so much that you don't really care if somebody else is making a little bit more than you. Salary fairness alone is not the path to a good job. Salary unfairness can absolutely make a job suck, but it's not what makes a job good. In fact, I would argue that if you find that you're overly concerned about fairly small differences in salary between you and your coworkers, then it's probably not really about the salaries. It may be a sign that your job sucks in general. And if that's the case, a raise isn't really going to help. You need to figure out a way to like the job you have or to get out of there and find a better job. Thanks for watching. What do you think about salary transparency? Is it a great tool for promoting fairness and openness? Or is it a recipe for total anarchy in the workplace? Have you worked in a company that tried to keep salaries secret? Were they? Or do you work in a company that shares salary information, and what effect has that had? Leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you do, you can really help me out in my efforts to bring more science-based sanity to workplaces all over. And most of all, stay happy.